start recording. Recording in progress. All right. Let's get started. And first, let's talk about our assignment. Then we'll go over light intensity versus exposure. Before I actually demo, I'm going to install Arnold 5.0, and then we can see if it's going to work. So you guys already know how to go to the Arnold website and download updates if they're there. Now, the part is installing the new version, which I'm going to guinea pig. We'll see how it goes. Like I said, I did some preliminary tests in 2022 and Maya's 2022. It worked pretty good. All right, so for our practice 2.1, we are going to be working with the principles of light, which is light direction, light intensity, light color, shadow quality. All the things we went over before, we're going to strive them every time we light. So there are some readings for you here. We got Jeremy Burns, digital lighting and rendering, shadows and occlusion, visual functions of shadows, appearance of shadows, shadow algorithms, and also light science, magic, and introduction to photographic lighting, principles of light, why they're important, what is light, color. So those are, they're actually pretty good reads. All right, so a couple things about the assignments today. You are going to be selecting from one of two choices for each light type. So the first light you're going to work on is going to be the AI area light, Arnold's area light, which I'll show you guys how to get to. It's really pretty simple. What you're going to do is choose one of the examples, either front light or top light. The choice is completely yours. Now, based on that decision, that is going to tell you what you need to do for the next exercise. So the way it works is AI area light, choose front, choose top. Somebody pick one, doesn't matter, I won't hold you to it. Anybody? Just pick one. All right, front light. Good. Make a decision. All right, front light. There we go. So if you choose to do front light with the area light, you will need to do top light for the directional light. If you chose to do the top light for the area light, then you would do the front light for the directional light. So each light type will have a different light direction. In the end, you will work with all four lights, and they will be in what are basically the four cardinal positions: front light, top light, back light, side light. Those are the very basic, simple positions. And you can see that each position of the light changes how that subject looks. These are simple blocks, single light source, all with the same AI standard surface material assigned to them, which today you guys are going to be responsible for assigning to the geometry. Now, when you assign an AI standard surface, an Arnold standard surface, not just the Maya standard surface, it's got to be AI, you will need to turn off the specularity. So the specular weight gets turned to 0, and we're going to be changing the color in the base color from, well, it's a color of very light gray, 0.8 to 0.5, which gives us 50% gray. We like to light in 50% gray because it's neutral. All right, so we get into choose front for the area light. You have to do top for the directional light. If you choose to do top for the area light, you have to do front for the directional light. Then you get down into working with minus point light. So minus point light, like a bare light bulb, you have a choice of either side or back. Your job is to match the reference. Take note where the light is brightest. Take note where the shadows are. That's really going to be your light direction right there. You can see pretty clearly in the side light here for the point light, you can see that the light source is fairly close to the backdrop here because it's really, really super bright. And you can see the shadows are kind of super long, which leads me to another discussion right here real quick about shadows. That's pretty weak. If your shadows are really long, then your light is low. If your shadows are really short, then the light is very high. So those two things should tell you, shadow length should at least help you with light direction. So you know the light's coming from the side, but if the shadows are super short, the light's a lot higher than, say, for example, our point light example. Those side light shadows are pretty long. So that means our light is fairly low. Now we got light on the next one, the backlight, right? You can see where it's kind of focused back here. Take note that we're seeing that little halo behind that block because the light is a little bit closer to the backdrop. Kind of creates that little halo. What's going to happen when a light is behind the subject? The shadows are going to come toward the camera. Now, in the case of every light, except for the directional light, the shadows are going to kind of fan out. The directional light, the shadows are going to be really perfectly parallel, just like our sun. Now, for the spotlight, everybody kind of freaks out over the spotlight because there's a lot more than just the 4 principles of light that we have to worry about. All of a sudden, we've got a light with 3 other attributes that we have to consider. So the spotlight has its own scene file. There is a separate scene file. So for the area light, directional light, point light, you're using the same scene file, just do a save as. For the spotlight, separate scene file, different geometry. You're going to be doing, well, whichever point light exercise you choose to do, you need to do the opposite light position for the spotlight. So, for example, if you choose to do the backlight for the point light, you'll have to do the side light for the spot. You choose to do the side light for the point, you need to do the backlight for the spot. Now, for the spotlight, spotlights can be a little scary because people see this spotlight cone and they kind of freak out. But ignore the spotlight cone because you're still interested in the principles of light. The first thing is the direction. If it says side light, the light's going to be somewhere over off to the side. If it's backlight, it's going to be somewhere behind the subject. The shadows are super long, it's going to be pretty low. If they're not that long, they're going to be kind of higher. You get the light direction, you get the light intensity. Now, is there any color? Well, this one looks kind of whitish. This one looks a little bit different. Kind of got a warm color to it. Some of these have no color. Some of these have warmish, coolish color, like purpley, pinkish light sometimes can be warm or it can be cool, depending on where it is in the color spectrum. So you do the light direction, you do the intensity, you take care of color if there is any. Shadow quality's got nothing to do with the spotlight information. It's all about big light, small light, or something similar to that. In the case of Maya, big light, the Maya lights, we have a control that will take care of making the shadows softer or harder. In the case of the area light, that's up to the position and also up to the scale of your light. Now, with a spotlight, once you've got light direction, light intensity, light color, shadow quality, then you worry about the cone. The cone is just the area of light that the spotlight takes up. So for example, if your shadows are accurate, adjusting your spotlight cone to get that round or ellipsoid shape from a spotlight will automatically work. You just need to know how big is it, and then are the edges of that spotlight cone soft? In some software packages, it's called cone softness. Maya calls it penumbra, which is basically edge of shadow. And then in addition to spotlight cone softness, there is also something called drop off, which is basically, is the light even in the entire cone? If it's not even, if it looks more focused in the middle like a true spotlight, or even a true flashlight. So for example, pretty weak phone light, but you can still see it's brighter in the middle and gradually gets less intense toward the edges as it goes outward. That is called drop off in the spotlight. Now, after you're done these 4 exercises, you are going to find some photo reference for a composition that you would like to try to recreate the look and feel of. Very similar to what you guys did in project 1, except you are responsible for lighting, but only allowed to use 1 light. Now, we recommend trying to do an image search for like film noir, because that is a fairly easy, most of the things done in film noir look like they can be done with a single light. So when you're looking for images, make sure, if you're using Google, just make sure you go under Tools, go to Size, and you want large. The bigger the reference, the better off you'll be. All right, so stuff like this looks like it could be a single light source. Over here, could be single light source, even though there's a bunch of lights over there. We still got our subject with a light. If we take a look at this image, we've still got our subject with his shadow going there. So that places our light somewhere around the corner of this building. And it looks like it's pretty low because the shadow is pretty long. So it's probably typical street lamp height. So here, film noir is also it uses light passing through objects a lot, like blinds or tree branches, to have light throw a silhouette or a pattern of the environment. So through the blinds is a really popular thing because all those slats of light look really dramatic. So single light here, possibly backlight, single light source. Again, looking through blinds, backlight. And film noir is all about the seedy side of humanity. It's all about, drugs, alcohol, money, gambling, anything that's illegal, that's fun, humans love to do. Makes for a great story. So here, this one's pretty simple. Typical spotlight. It's got soft edges. You can see the shadow on the subject is fairly hard edged. Small light, hard shadow. Very dramatic, light passing through a window. So all of these make really good candidates for just finding something that interests you. Now, you're not really just stuck with film noir. If you don't like film noir, find something else, but just realize you can only use one light to light your environment. Your job is going to be take our geometry, one of our scenes, either the spotlight scene or the other scene, duplicate the blocks, rearrange them, stack them, resize them, whatever you need to do to get the look and feel of your reference. And you guys did a really good job on the My Comp in the first part. There were some really good examples. In fact, you know, quite a few of them I'm going to use for the next class. So, does that make sense? Any questions so far? Let me show you some examples. Yeah, everybody likes to see examples. Where are we? Here we go. So, like I said, you know, now a couple of lights you can actually make visible to the camera, and I'll show you how to do that, which is kind of what they did here. They took an area light, they made it visible to the camera, stuck it behind the subject, and it acts like a big light source and looks pretty dramatic. This one, parallel light rays, pretty much you can guess that's a directional light. Lots of little blocks stacked up, put a light passing through it, stack up a couple of other blocks, and you've got the scene set up. Single light source. The thing about film noir, everybody smokes, everybody drinks. I'm not condoning it, it's just the way it is with that form. So nobody cared apparently about lung cancer or anything, or, you know, it looked cool. Exactly. You know why? Because all that smoke looked really cool to the camera. Very simple. Hard light source. You can tell shadows are pretty hard. They're all pretty parallel. This one, spotlight overhead, just enough to catch like front part of the face to be able to put it in there. Very simple, but effective. Like I said, everybody smokes. The only thing I would say here is one thing that I notice a lot when students first start lighting is everybody's afraid of light intensity. Everybody's afraid to make something bright. You need to make this much brighter because take a look at the light hitting that skin. There's a really distinct, vibrant light edge there. And that's kind of what we're after. We'll get a little more intensity. This one needs more backlight. This one did a pretty good job of capturing foreground, midground, background, all with a single light source. And even though we're not doing that environment, volumetric, God ray kind of thing with lights, they still were able to capture the mood of it. Dropping that light in the center of the scene, having a foreground element and a background element worked out really well. Yep, you can resize them. You can stretch. The only thing you can't do is remodel something. No modeling. Don't bring anything in from another scene. But yes, scale, rotate, translate, duplicate, whatever you need to do. Yep. Everything that's in the scene. So pick your scene wisely. If you start, you don't like it, try the other scene. But the shapes, with those bare shapes, you can pretty much scaling, rotating, translating, you can pretty much get any object you want. And remember, it's all about just layout. We're not really worried about it exactly looking like it because that doesn't look anything like the real thing, but you get the idea. And that's really what you're looking for in the layout phase. In the layout phase, it's all proof of concept. Hey, here's my idea. This is what I want to do. I got some primitive objects in there to kind of take up space and show you what this will look like. Very simple, but very effective. Obviously, you can put a lot of work into it or not too much. It all depends. As long as it's well done, it doesn't really matter. Nobody cares about the complexity of the scene. They care about, hey, that's pretty good. That looks, I get the idea that what you're going for is coming from that reference. Jonathan said, are we messing with camera lenses as well for this one? Yes, good question. If you think it looks like it's a long lens, try a long lens. You know, try 70 millimeter, 100 millimeter, see what it looks like. If it's too much lens compression, everything looks too flat, lower it. Try going 70, try 50, maybe try 40, try 35. Work your way down till you get a reasonable lens, either lack of distortion or distortion, depending on what you need it to look like. All right, questions? Does that make sense? All right, let's talk a little bit about light intensity versus light exposure, and then we'll get on with doing some of the demos. Just to get a feel for what the lights do so that you can have a better idea before you start trying to work them into your assignment. What kind of controls are you looking at? What do you need to worry about? Because there's a lot of attributes in the lights, and a lot of them we don't necessarily need for basic lighting. All right, so in the Arnold lights, you will see exposure right underneath intensity. Now, exposure is basically a multiplier of intensity. If anybody's ever done any camera or any photography with something other than a point and shoot camera, if you've ever had kind of like a single lens reflex or something like that, where you've got the ability to kind of dial in the shutter speed, the lens opening, the color balance, anything like that. Yes. Say again? Okay, good. So you're familiar with that. So you know exposure is basically you have stops of your shutter, right? That the aperture of the lens, how it opens. Each time you advance it, it gets twice as much light or it shuts out twice as much light. So you either double the light or you half the light. Every time you open that lens up, it gets twice as much, it allows twice as much light in. And that's really what the exposure control is doing here. It's a multiplier by the power of 2, sort of like what the Arnold camera AA does. Now, the reason we don't use exposure is because people will use exposure as a way to keep the intensity low. But that's not really what you do. If you go out and measure the sunlight in the real world, and we usually measure things in lumens, you'll see that the measurement is really, really big. So for our class, we do not use exposure at all. I want you guys to get used to the energy levels in the intensity. In the principles of light, coming directly from a photography book, they don't talk about, oh, it's not, light direction, light exposure. No, it's light direction and light intensity. Because in the real world, photographers use lights that have intensity numbers. They'll use, 100 watt, 500 watt, 1,000, 1,500, 2K, 5K, 10K. The lights get bigger, they get brighter, they get hotter. Some of those lights are on a crane if you're ever doing a film shoot. They're big, they're heavy, they're bright. There's lots of electricity. Now, so just to kind of break it down for you, real world lighting is measured in a linear fashion. That means we've got, well, basically, if this is 0, meaning no light, and this is bright, we generally have a line that looks something like this. We've got all these infinite little areas where we can make it bright or not as bright. Exposure would work more like this. So we got no light, we got bright, but instead of it going in a linear line, it'll start like up here, and then the next notch will be there. So on our way to bright, we have light, we have a big jump, we have more light, we have another big jump, we have more light. It works a lot like the shutter. Well, not necessarily the speed, because the shutter speed is how long is the lens, is the camera aperture or opening, how long is it open for, allowing light into the camera lens. All right, so exposure is nonlinear. It's a multiplier of your intensity by the power of 2. Specifically, it is, like I said, a camera setting like the f-stop, which is basically the size of the camera aperture opening, allowing light to hit the center. Now, real world light, like I said, is usually measured in lumens. In fact, the new version of Unreal used to measure everything in what are called candelas, which is basically old school candle power. It's like, 100 candelas is equal to like 100 candles being lit all together in a cluster. So the new version of Unreal, they're starting to measure everything in lumens, just like it is when you go to buy a light bulb. You don't buy a light bulb for the exposure. You buy a light bulb for how bright it is. And usually it's like, they'll tell you, oh, this LED light bulb is equivalent to a 60-watt light bulb, which is equal to about 800 lumens. What you're buying is the 800 lumens. You go in, you look at like a 100-watt light bulb, that's kind of like 1,100, 1,200 lumens. 500-watt light bulb is like 9,500 lumens. The higher the lumen number, the brighter the light is, more intensity. Now, when you go to buy a light bulb, you're also buying what is called color temperature. We'll get into that later on. For now, we're just worried about exposure. Now, Like I said, exposure is a multiplier of intensity, and in CG, we generally don't use it unless we are adjusting the exposure of all lights together. Very similar to what you would do on a set where you've got everything lit, and then you would either adjust the camera or you would take all the lights and adjust all of them together. We're not using them as individual light controls. Does that make sense? Questions? Some of these numbers are going to be big. Don't be afraid of big numbers. Don't rely on Maya's sliders either. You know, you're going to go and turn it up, and some of the sliders are set to only go 0 to 1 or maybe to 10. And then people go, I can't go any higher. Yeah, you can, just type it in. Maya will reset that for you. Some programmer decided, hey, that's a good range for the slider, but that's not the full range of the attribute. All right, so like I said, don't be afraid of going above 100. Don't be afraid of going above 1,000 or even tens of thousands. Depending on the size of your scene, it will require more light intensity. If you've got a teeny tiny scene, you can probably get away with less intensity because the area is very small. Think of like you've got a box. Say a box that's 1 foot by 1 foot, right? You put a light bulb in there, that box, inside that box, it's going to be really bright. But if you take that light bulb out of the box, put it into a big 10 foot by 10 foot room, well, it's not going to illuminate as bright as it did in that small space. All right, questions? Now, you may wind up using exposure in some other classes, but generally, light intensity. All right, so let's do, well, first off, let's go and see if we can update Arnold. You have a question? No, it's me. I'm going to update it for you, and I'm going to test it out and see. If it's okay, you guys can feel free. 4.2.4 is totally fine for the rest of the class. If you want to try and go up to 5, that's fine. But if there's issues, I'd rather have you guys with something that's stable. So give me a couple days to play around with it. Maybe on Friday, I'll let you know if it's yay or nay. Well, of course, you'll see me bail immediately if it keeps crashing Maya. I'm just going to go back to 4.2.4. All right, Arnold. All right, good. So normally I would click get latest. I went there at home only because of all the issues we had with the network the other day, trying to download stuff. Apparently Full Sail didn't like the address. I guess it doesn't like Arnold. So here we go, installs. And I saved my trusty 4.2.4 in case this one dies on me. All right, so if you decide to update Arnold again, just make sure anytime you go to update Arnold, make sure you quit out of Maya first. Just going to launch the installer. Continue. Yeah, go ahead. Agree. Yep, I want all of that. Let's continue. Install. And then, of course, Apple's wonderful security. All right, so in theory, it is installed. Where does it get installed? It gets installed in your applications folder under Autodesk, under Arnold, I believe. And there's my two different flavors. I've got Maya 2022 and Maya 2020. And this one should be 5.0. We'll know in a second when I go to relaunch Maya. All right, let's check Arnold, about Arnold 5.0. Here we go. Let's see if it'll work. Actually, I'm going to test it out on project 1 just to see if it'll work, which I believe it will. All right, so trouble I had when I installed this on Maya 2022 was I opened up the Arnold render view and I hit the render button and it just stood there and went blank on me, just like it's doing now, where it says initializing the render, which was really kind of maddening. So I stopped it, I closed it, and I tried again, hit render, still no dice. So hit stop. This time I hit just the render button next to it. And that didn't work either. Initializing the renderer. We quit out of Maya. Let's try it again. Don't save. Now, something else I can do is every once in a while, when you install a new version of something, you need to delete your old Maya preferences because sometimes stuff gets stuck in there. Well, let's find out if that is the case. Let's set project. Let's open our scene up. Do daytime again. So Jonathan said his went and worked after he went into the render settings. So that's always a good idea. That would be my next step. So go in there, Arnold render settings. Current renderer is Arnold. I don't need any of that on. That looks pretty good. Let's try it. And that seemed to do it. So apparently 5.0 doesn't trust the render settings that you had from an older version. So go in. If you get the blank image like I did, stop your renderer, go into the render settings, just double check everything, close it. Now mine is rendering from not the render cam. So I'm just going to switch cameras here again. And there we go. All right, so it is working. All right, now, this is a couple of things I want to show you guys real quick about what I noticed with 5.0. All right, so this is my bare bones camera AA3 diffuse at 2. Let me put on the denoiser. So you'll notice there is actually a bunch of imagers that have been added. There used to be just the denoiser noise and the denoiser optics. Now there is something called a denoiser, which looks like OIDN, OIDN. That's basically Intel's open image denoiser that works with the base Intel chips on our Macs and any PC that's got an Intel chip in it. Let me show you the difference between the two. So here is our standard noise denoiser. So first off, we got to wait for it to go through. Once it renders everything, it will denoise it. Now, the reason I'm actually waiting for this is because I want to show you the denoisers have slightly different times on them. And also the effect is going to be slightly different. All right, so it's going through. Now you'll notice at 5.0, it is actually trying to display the denoise as it does the last pass, which is different. The other one, it did the last pass, then it stood there frozen, and then it denoised it. All right, so that was 1 minute, 20 seconds. Let's add that here. Let me switch my renderer. Let me get rid of this one. Or stop. Let me add the OIDN, the OIDN denoiser. Now, there are no settings for this. This one will immediately, as soon as you enable it, what are you doing? All right. As soon as you enable that, it goes through and it turns itself on. So the one thing I want you to take away from it is almost instantaneous. Let me turn this denoiser off. All right, disable it. All right, so that's what it looks like disabled. Let me turn this back on. Notice it immediately has a filter on it. And every time it goes through the iteration, it will actually get better and better. Now, it uses a slightly different filter than the noise denoiser does. All right, so let me just do this. This is actually meant to give you really super quick feedback, but not to be the final version. So the other denoiser, that was, what was that? That was 1:20. And this was 36 seconds. Now you can clearly see it's kind of blurry. There's not enough samples there, but it actually looks pretty good. I wouldn't suggest using this right now. I'm going to do some tests on it. And like I said, I'll let you know Friday. The reason is, even though this is all splotchy, look at the detail you get. Right here. Oh, come on, really? Right here. If you take a look at that and compare it, I basically have no poster on the wall. It's completely blurred out into oblivion. Whereas here, I've got some detail. I know I need more samples. Now, what does that look like cranked up? It's probably going to look a lot better. Will we get that poster back? I don't know. In fact, let me stop this and just do that area. All right, so yes, I did get some more detail in there. So throwing more samples at it will probably get it to look better. Time will tell. For now, stick with the noise denoiser till I get a chance to test this out some more. All right, so looks like this will work. Let's do some light. Which light should we demo first? Directional light, point light, spotlight, or area light? Up to you guys. All right, we got one area. Any other votes? Area, that's 2. Jonathan's area. All right, let's do area. All right, for this, I'm going to make a simple polyplane, make 3 spheres so you guys can follow along. So basically a new scene. I'm not going to save this scene. This is purely demo. So let's create a polyplane. Let's create a couple of spheres. For the spheres, they're going to be halfway into the geometry in the ground when you create them. If you go into the channel box, you can translate them in Y1 unit. That will make them sit on the ground. And then let's just duplicate that, Control D. Let's duplicate that one. So anytime you create any default geometry in Maya, you get an object that has the initial shading group Lambert1 assigned to it. Okay, Lambert1 is fine and well for Maya renders, but not good enough for Arnold. So what you want to do is select all your geometry in your scene, and this goes for today's exercises as well. Select all your geometry. You can marquee it in the viewport. You can go into the outliner and select them all that way also. Anybody know what is a shortcut for assigning a new material to an object? So we can go right click and assign new material. That works. That will bring up the assign new material window here. What's another way? What if I don't like to right click because I'm really lazy? Which I am. Right clicking involves, mouse, you got to click, you got to drag over, you got to select something. Spacebar, that does it, but I still have to go in here and kind of click around. How about keyboard shortcut? Shift T, T as in tango. Shift T, whatever you have selected, that brings up the assign new material. And on the left side, you go under Arnold, you go to shader, and you select AI standard surface. Now, with your object selected, you hit Shift T, you select the AI standard surface. That will assign the AI standard surface to everything in your scene that's selected. So if I individually select them, there it is, in all its Arnold glory. Nope. When you do Shift T, that brings up the Create Render node. You go down under Arnold, you click on AI Standard Surface. Because there's a bunch of choices, but you just want the AI Standard Surface. AI Standard Surface is like the Swiss Army knife of tools. You can make any surface out of that material. Wood, concrete, human skin, glass, metal, plastic, doesn't matter. The only thing it's not really good at are multi-layer things like car paint, where you've got a base color, you may have a metal coat, metal fleck coat, you may have a clear coat on top of that where you can actually see layering in there. You actually need a separate layer material for that. But it pretty much can do almost anything else. Now, with the AI standard surface assigned to everything, two things you have to do. The first is turn off specular weight. We don't want shiny objects. And the second is change the base color value from 0.8 to 0.5. 0.5 will give you 50% gray. So click in there, go down to value, 0.5. Now everything is 50% gray without reflectivity. This is our base diffuse material. Does that make sense? So every assignment that you get from us, unless we specifically tell you otherwise, you will need to do this because everything's going to have Lambert assigned to it. And Lambert will not respond to light the same way that the Arnold materials do. It's just not designed to be that physically accurate. So at this point, if I open up my render view, let me get rid of all this stuff in here and hit render, I won't see anything. Why? Anybody? No lights. There you go. So, but I've got objects. I've got a camera. Yeah, but no light for the, to hit those objects, to bounce off the surface, to go into the camera. Be just like if I had a light in here and a camera with no surfaces. I would have the same thing. We're missing that third component. So to access the AI area light, it is in the Arnold shelf, and it is this icon. You want to avoid, and I can't stress this enough, don't go up to create lights and choose the area light from here. That will be a Maya area light. Yeah, it will have Arnold attributes, but it doesn't fall, or it doesn't behave in the same way that the actual Arnold area light does. So for the area light only, come back here, we go here. And if you're ever not sure, just hover above any of these buttons, and eventually the tool hint will come up, or you can look down here in the bottom left. It says create area light. So I create area light. It says Arnold area light, AI area light. Life is good. Color's white. Intensity is 1. Exposure, ignore it. And if I hit render, I can see a little tiny piece of light here in my IPR. And the reason I see a little tiny piece of light is because it's buried in the geometry. So if I pull it up, pull it back a little, you can see it's really, really dim. I can barely make out anything in here. And that's because the default unit of intensity of 1 is not enough. So what happens if I turn it all the way up? Well, it goes to 10. Okay, not bright enough. But it's all the way up. Just give it 100. Not bright enough? Give it 300. Now it's starting to be nice and bright like an actual light. Notice that the area light does not illuminate anything behind it. It is meant to be a flat surface that emits light from that little pointer, from the side the little pointer is on. Now, if I want the light to come around the other way, well, I got to rotate it. I can aim it down a little bit more. Kind of pull it up a little. So notice that this light kind of fans out in all, not in all directions, but it fans out from the center out to the right and the left. You can see that by the shadows. All right, so you want your shadows to be less long. The light's got to be a little higher. The lower you go with the light, the longer the shadows are going to be, but you run the risk of running into the ground, which creates a hot spot there. So if your light needs to be really low, you're probably going to have to back off on the intensity a little, especially if you're around geometry. All right, so for this light, translation, rotation, what about scale? So there are my shadows by default. Pull it up a little bit. Let me go back to my really bright intensity. All right. So notice that I get a certain level of softness because the light is fairly large. It's an area. It's a shape of light. Now, if I want my shadows to be harder or to look more contracted, I simply scale the light. I can make it smaller. Look what happens to my shadows. Now they are super small, sort of like my little projector when I walk up in front of the board and wave my hand. If I want my shadows to be softer, I make the light bigger. The bigger I make the light, the softer the shadows, the longer it's going to take to clean up when it renders because you're breaking apart those shadows and it's going to take time to smooth it out. So, big light, soft shadows. Small light, hard shadows. What about if I have a small light and I make it pretty far away? It's going to start to soften up also. Now, if I move the light further away, guess what? I'm going to lose some intensity. So I'm going to have to crank up the intensity to compensate for it. I move it further away. It gets sharper and sharper. I move it really close. Notice the shadows get softer. But ideally, when you're working with lights, you want to find a good position for it so the shadows match. You can get the intensity. And then you can go about your business of adjusting the color if there is any. And shadow quality, which I can do by making the light bigger if I need softer shadows or smaller if I need harder shadows. To add color to the light, simply go into the color attribute and add in a little light color of your choice. I'm just going to adjust the hue, add a little saturation in there. Light will saturate very quickly. So if I take this saturation slider and go all the way over, now it starts to get oversaturated to cartoon. You want to keep the saturation level with light somewhere between 0.2, maybe 0.3. That'll help. If I want to change it to a cool color, go in, make it green like every zombie hospital in any game. Go in here, make it warm, make it very cool. Go into kind of purpley light, which could go either warm or cool because it's got red and blue in it together. Yes. You're not using viewport rendering, are you? No, I'm using stop your renderer, close it, close the render view, and then open it up again and try and re-render. Sometimes if you're changing too many parameters, the IPR just doesn't catch up. Yep, you'll find that'll happen to me. Like I'll be doing something, all of a sudden something won't change. Got to stop your render, close the window, open it again, try it. All right, now we've got, let me just kind of scale the light like this. Let me go back to, oh, if you want to get back to a neutral white light color, real quick way to do it, take your slider in the color attribute, drag it left and right, and that will reset it and make it white light, which is a really quick way of doing it. Now, if you say, oh, I didn't want to do that, well, guess what? In your color picker, in your color palette here, it's got the swatch that you had before. So you can always get, it always keeps a memory of what you had. All right, now, By default, the shape of the area light you get is a quad, meaning 4 sides. It doesn't have to be perfectly square. It could be a rectangle. Now, let me just take a screen or take a snapshot of that. We can also change the shape of the light to disk. Now, is there a difference in the shadows? Ever so slightly. This is a square area light. This is a disk shape. Square disk. The shadows are altered just a little bit. Now, there's one other shape you can do, which is called a cylinder. Trouble with the cylinder is you're going to have a dark area in the middle where it will not show any light because it is a hollow cylinder. Anytime we say area light, assume it's going to either be a quad or a disk. Reason we don't use cylinders will become apparent when we get into using what are called mesh lights. Because any custom shape we need, we can just take any piece of geometry, make it into a light. It's a whole lot more accurate and better looking than a cylinder. So cylinder's pretty cool. It'll illuminate from all sides except the top and the bottom because it's empty. Kind of looks like a black hole. All right, now, one other thing you can do with this. First off, any questions about the area light so far? Makes sense. About Zoom, anybody got questions? You guys okay in there? All right, Michael's good. Jonathan's good. Katie's good. Okay. Oh, you mean change the edges of it? It's going to be pretty wide based on the scale of your light. To control the area that it takes up, that's going to be a spotlight. Now, the one other thing that you can do is, let me kind of swing around to the back side here. And now my light is behind my subject, and you can see my shadows are coming toward the camera. I can make the light visible to the camera. In Arnold, you go down under the Arnold area light attributes, scroll down to visibility. You will see there is a slider there for camera. Now, there's a whole bunch of things you can do with Arnold area, Arnold lights in general. You can make them affect just a certain portion of the material. Generally with lights, you want them to affect all parts. But the camera, turn visibility on, and now it becomes visible to the camera, but only when it's pointing directly at the camera. So if I swing my scene around here, notice it's not visible to the camera anymore because I'm looking at the back of the light. So if you want your light to be visible, it's got to be aimed at the camera. And again, how you scale it. Now, the thing about this is it's never going to get any brighter to the camera. Yeah, I can turn down the visibility. but it doesn't really do anything till you get down really low and then it just kind of goes out. So just either turn it on or turn it off. If I make it less intense, let me drop it down to 10. Notice it still looks the same. It still looks just as bright to the camera that it did at 400. Trouble is, I got less light in there. So I could take it down to 1. Gets a little dull, but just be aware you're kind of stuck with how bright it looks to the camera. It's not really meant to do anything other than show visibility. This will become important when you're working with metal and glass, because a lot of times you want to see your lights. And area lights in particular are used in photography all the time. They're called softboxes. You see those big rectangles or shapes of light on objects all the time. They put them over cars when they do car commercials so you can see the shape of the car. All right, so those are probably the most useful functions inside the area light. Intensity, color, light shape. Most of the time it's going to be quad. You might change it to disc. And then if you want to make it visible to the camera, make sure the light is aimed at the camera so the camera can see it. Go down under visibility, turn it on. If you don't want it visible, turn visibility to camera to 0. All right, does that make sense? So, backlight, side light, front light, top light. It's all about the position of, well, the camera is always going to look at the subject. When you're looking at the subject, the position of the light is based on where it is in relationship to the subject. Because camera is always looking at subject. Light is usually always focused on subject. And that's where the position relationship is. So we say front light, that means the light's going to be pretty close to where the camera is. If we say side light, it's going to be probably somewhere around maybe 90 degrees-ish. If it's going to be backlight, it's going to be somewhere behind the subject. If it's going to be top light, it's going to be somewhere overhead, usually above the subject, maybe directly or off to the side a little bit. All right, questions about the Arnold area light? Make sense? All right, let's get rid of that. There we go. Now we're in a black void. So which light should we do next? Directional light. Okay. Let's get some sunlight in here. All right, so directional light for this, we actually need to go into the menu for it, and it is a Maya light with Arnold attributes. So we go up to Create, Lights, Directional Light. Drops in at the center of the world. I hit the good old render button, and you'll notice that I get the sphere on the left to be visible, but none of the other parts of any of the other spheres are visible. Yet the directional light is sitting right in the middle of the center sphere. So you say, okay, well, that's because it's inside the geometry. Get it out of the geometry. Fair enough. Let's pull it up. Wait, my render's not updating. Here, let me move it back. Pull it up, pull it over. Nothing's changing. So you say, okay, IPR, not catching up. Close the window, open it again, let's re-render. Wait, it looks the same. Why? Okay. Pretty low. All right, so not facing the objects, right? And pretty low. So let's raise it up. Okay, intensity is pretty low. Let's go 100. Ah, rotation. My old friend. Yes, this light is all about rotation. I think it's a little bright. Turn it down a little. Now, this one is going to come in with a lot of intensity, even a little number, which is, in my opinion, stupid for Maya to do that. But other software packages start out with their version of the directional light at like 50,000 or 100,000 units. Maya 1, don't ask me why. It's been that way since the mid-1980s. Everybody thought it was a good idea. Yeah, sun's 1 watt. All right, so anyway, that's a whole other discussion. Directional light, parallel light rays. The reason we didn't see it before was because those light rays were skimming across the top of the plane. And they're parallel, so it was hitting that first sphere, and that sphere was shadowing all the others. Now, think of this light as an infinite wall of light in whatever direction those arrows are pointed. There's no constraint for distance. It's just aimed in that direction. So if I move this light like all the way back here, it still looks the same. So in reality, the only real thing that matters with this light is rotation. So directly overhead, shadows are directly underneath the subject. That's pretty bright. Let's knock that down a little. Now, you can see it looks like it gets a little darker as I rotate it upward more. And that's because less of those parallel light rays are hitting my subject. And then it's good night. And then we're lighting the other side of the planet. And then there we go. Now we're coming back in. All right, now, so pretty simple so far, right? Aim the light, rotation's the only thing that matters, intensity, pretty simple. Color works the same way as the area light. Come in here, put a little bit of color in there. You want to make it look more like moonlight. We'll do that. We'll knock the intensity down a little. Now it kind of looks a little more like moonlight. Notice that the shadows are razor sharp. Now, our sunlight, if we go outside at noon, our shadows are going to be directly under our feet. They're going to be pretty small. the sun does not really have soft shadows all that much. Even if you go out in the afternoon or in the morning, like mid-morning, mid-afternoon, where the sun is kind of, about 45 degrees up in the sky, not complete 90, your shadows are going to be longer, but they're not going to be that soft. They'll be a little soft, but not that much. So, under the Arnold portion of the directional light, there is a control called light angle. Right down here, Arnold angle. Arnold recommends that to get accurate shadows for our sun, that we put the angle at 0.5. Now, the reason we do that is what will happen is when the sun is directly overhead, the shadows will be a little bit harder than they will when it's angled and the shadows are longer. So when I type in 0.5 here, kind of hard to notice. Let me kind of zoom in here. The shadows have a little bit of softness on the edges as opposed to 0. That's like a razor. Now you say, okay, well, that's all fine and well. What does it look like when the shadows get longer? Good question. Glad you asked that. So as they get longer, they get a little bit softer. You can see when it's more overhead, they're a little bit harder. Now, other software packages like RenderMan uses 0.53 for the angle of the sun. V-Ray uses 0.5 also. So when you create a directional light, you want to get accurate shadows, put the angle under Arnold at 0.5. That will automatically soften the shadows for you based on your angle of light. Does that make sense? So for the sun, there is no bigger, there is no smaller. It's not going to change it. In fact, if you go ahead and scale the light, it's really not going to change it at all. It's going to make the icon gigantic, but notice nothing happens to the light itself. You're just making it bigger to be more manageable in your scene. Because some scenes you may have that are gigantic, the sun will come in as a little tiny icon. Make it bigger so you can work with it. If it's too big in your very small scene, make it smaller. Right, does that make sense? Pretty simple to use. Generally, rule of thumb, don't use a directional light inside unless you've got a window and the directional lights outside coming in through the window. Nobody lights the interior of a room with the sun. I mean, like nobody brings the sun in and uses it as a light source. The only thing that might be equivalent is if you're in some kind of special setting where you've got a super powerful light and it's really bright and it's like a stadium light. But even those, there are clusters of lights. They're wrapped all around the stadium. Some people use directional lights for that, to do a stadium. But you got to be careful because the shadows can look really weird. Because it is like having multiple suns. Honestly, you're probably better off using another light type. But just letting you know, because I have seen light setups, they call them light domes, where people would just make a sphere and snap lights to it all the way around so it would just wash the whole scene out with light. Yeah, you had to do that in the old days before global illumination and really good rendering. But nowadays, you don't have to do that. We have things like dome lights for just that purpose. Anyway. All right, so that is kind of a quickie for the directional light. Which one should we do next? Spotlight? All right, let's do spot and then we'll do point. All right, so for a spotlight, you will go up again under Create, Lights, Spot. I hit the render button, nothing happens. Why? Well, because the spotlight is inside the geometry. All right, fair enough. Let's translate it up out of there. But I'm not seeing it. Where is it? Well, you're not aimed at it. Okay. How come I can't see anything? Well, let's try beefing up the intensity here. There we go. So you can really see the difference with an intensity of 1 with a spotlight. It's like, it's so dim you can't even see it. All right, now, spotlight automatically gives you light in the shape of a cone. So you got a couple things going on here. You got the cone that has an edge to it, and you've got your shadows. So for a spotlight, since it's a Maya light, we can't scale the spotlight. All we're going to do is scale the icon, and it's not going to change the light. If we want to make those shadows softer, not the edge of the light, just the shadows inside the light, we have to go down under the Arnold section, and we use something called radius. All right, that's a weird name. Why? Okay, the point light and the spotlight are actually the same light. The difference is a point light is naked in space, shining in all directions. And it is an infinitely small point, computer infinitely small, like a super small number, which means it has no physical size, which means you get razor sharp shadows. You give it what's called a radius to fake it into having a physical size. And you say, okay, great. So that means you turn it up and it softens your shadows. Yes, that's exactly what you do. Increase the radius, it makes the shadows inside the cone softer. Decrease the radius, it makes the shadows harder. By default, you get 0 razor sharp shadows. You generally want to have some kind of softness on the edge. Questions? Make sense so far? All right, so the other attributes, you got color, same thing. Add color to the light. Can you make it visible to the camera? No. It does not allow visibility. Because generally, most of the time, you're not going to have a spotlight aimed at the camera. You use an area light. If you need it to be a round shape, guess what? Make the area light a disc. Now you've got a round shape that you can make visible to the camera. All right, so the big points of the spotlight are this cone angle. So my cone angle is set at 40. What is 40? It's 40 degrees. So the light basically has an opening of, well, 40 degrees, which is sort of like this, as opposed to like 90 if I stretch my fingers out, which would be that, which takes up more area, and the spotlight can actually go. So there's 90. You can see we're making the cone bigger. It has a bigger area of light. If I open it up all the way, it's pretty much a big, giant, flat light now. It's got no cone. But that's not why you make a spotlight, to make it a big, flat light. You make it a spotlight to get that shape. So, cone angle, size of the shape of the light, or I should say, size of the cone, or ellipse, or circle, whatever you want to call it. Now, notice that the light intensity inside this cone is fairly even. So let me bring this over and aim it down a little more. There we go. Make it a little bigger. So it's pretty even inside there. And it's also got a very hard edge. So that hard edge we can adjust with what's called the penumbra angle. Notice that the penumbra angle of 0, the slider's like right in the middle. What that means is I can make the cone get softer by pushing the edges of the cone outward like this. It'll grow, but gradually get softer. Or I can make it go inward, which goes into negative numbers, which makes it soften inward. Now, if I want my spotlight to not be evenly lit inside the cone, I want it to look like car headlights or a flashlight where it's bright in the middle, gradually gets less intense. We use what's called drop-off. Drop-off, just adding a little bit of drop-off, and I'm just nudging the slider. It like jumps. So if you want to use drop-off, like type some numbers in. So at 0, it's evenly distributed light throughout the entire cone. Once I add a little drop off, let me just go to 1. You can see it maintains its intensity in the center, but gradually gets less intense toward the edges or drops off. So between drop off and cone angle, you can make the light fairly soft looking. You just have to be careful because drop off and penumbra sometimes mess with each other. Like I said, you got to kind of choose one or the other sometimes. Pretty finicky. But in theory, that's what they both do. A couple other things about this light that are unique and much easier to use I can actually use what is called the interactive manipulator to aim this light. The interactive manipulator in Maya is done by selecting the light and hitting the Shift and T, T for Tango key, both Shift T, that will bring up a center of interest. So Shift T, nope. Oh, wait, no, it's not T. Shift T is the wrong one, sorry. It's the T key. My bad. Got shift on the brain. All right, so the T key. So Shift T brings up the create render node to assign a material. The T key, interactive manipulator, creates a little center of interest from the center of the light that goes out a couple of units. And you can pretty much aim this wherever you want it. The nice thing about this is wherever you aim that center of interest, the light will follow it. Likewise, I can aim this at my subject and move my light, and my light will always be aimed towards the subject. Most of the time, you probably plant this right in the middle of your subject. That way you move your light around and it's pretty much going to be where you want it. To get rid of that interactive manipulator, just hit either the T, or sorry, the W, the E, or the R for translate, rotate, or scale. The interactive manipulator is really good for aiming it. Unfortunately, it does not work with the Arnold area light, which is a shame because that would be a great way to aim it. It does work with the sun, the directional light, so you can kind of use it if you want to aim it around, but actually the sun is all about rotation. It's easier just to use the rotate tool. Questions? So for this, get the direction of the light first. Forget about that cone. Aim the light, get the shadows right, get the intensity right, get the color, then add in the cone, how soft is the cone, and then if there is any drop off inside the light, meaning does that light inside the cone look even, or does it look like it's bright in the middle and falls off towards the edges? All right, last light. Is going to be the point light. The point light behaves like a bare light bulb. Hit the render button, bring it out of the ground. Just like the spotlight, it's going to be way too dim. Notice by default, since this does shine in all directions, you're going to illuminate everything in all directions and it's going to fan out. So can you scale this light? No. Well, you can, but nothing's going to happen. It'll show like it's scaling inside the channel box, but you're not going to get anything out of it. So color, same as the others. If you want color in there, under the Arnold section, If you need your shadows to be soft, you've got the same control as the spotlight. Remember, the two of them are basically the same light. The only difference is the spot, that light is being projected through a cone. In the bare point light, it's just going in all directions. So we increase the radius and it softens the shadows. More radius means a bigger light. All right, does that make sense? One other thing about this light, you can make this visible to the camera. So if I go down under Arnold, visibility, turn it on. You say, wow, that's teeny tiny. Well, guess what? If I turn my radius to 0, it's no longer visible to the camera because it's so small the camera can't see it. When you are increasing the radius, this is what's going on behind the scenes. Arnold is physically making that light bigger behind the scenes. So you say, all right, cool. Here's what happens, though, if your light is either too close to the geometry or too big. Oops. Let me just put that back. And you say, okay, well, I mean, it just got super big. If I turn off visibility, you're actually cutting away geometry. You can't see it. So be careful when using the radius that you don't have the light so close and you make it so soft that it digs into the geometry. So bare light bulb, think of it that way. All right, questions? All right, let's do a quick demo for you guys so you get an idea of kind of the workflow that makes sense for this assignment. And where is it? Right here. All right, so let me download project 2 real quick. There we go. Going to go set Maya. Right there, Maya project folder. Let's open up the area directional point light. And by default, you're going to be in the render cam. Good news is this camera is locked, so you don't have to worry about moving it. Generally, when I work with this, I like to work in the viewport, but render from the render cam. This way I can see what's going on. So you'll see this is kind of like Stonehenge in a bowl. You'll notice that the camera can see in, but if you're inside, you can't see out. Magic of making it single-sided here. All right. So first thing you want to do, and what I'm going to demo is the directional light. So let's, because that's quick and easy, and I don't want to run too much over. Should we do the front or the top? Okay, we got one front. Front? Front. Okay, let's do front. All right, so front light. Good. Let's go take a look at getting started here. Be sure that cast shadows is turned on in each of your lights. By default, when you create a brand new light, shadows should be turned on. If for some reason you have lights, you have visibility, it renders, but you have no shadows, check in your light attributes that it's turned on. Also, make sure you assign the AI standard surface to all your geometry before you do any scene. So in here, I can select the group. I can select the bowl, shift click. I can come in and just marquee select, do shift T. That brings up the assign new material under Arnold shader, AI standard surface. Once you create the AI standard surface, turn specular weight to 0. Change your base color value to 0.5. If you forget that, just go into the getting started section here, and you'll see there's all your parameters. So I'm going to do a save as. Why? Because it's Maya, it's Arnold, it's Henri. And let's do the directional light. All right, so now I got a copy. I don't have to worry about Maya doing the unmentionable thing to me. So we're going to do directional light. Let's create light. Oops, directional light. And for this, I'm going to open up my render view and let's render. And let's go to the render cam. All right, so don't forget directional light, it's all about rotation. So let's get this light so it shows up. All right, now, inside your file, your folder download, you're going to have some reference images. So here's the directional light reference. We're going to load this into our render view just like we did with project 1. And this will allow me to go back and forth and see how close my shadows are compared to the reference. So let's load that in under File, Open Image, Reference, Directional Light Front, Open. Now I can see, oh, I actually got pretty close. I wasn't even intending to do that. So my shadows are too long, which means my light needs to be higher. Say again? You want to get as close as you can because this is all about trying to be accurate with where the light is. And you'll be surprised, you can get really close. It's going to take some work. Some lights are going to be easier than others. Like the directional light is pretty simple, honestly. Parallel shadows, you know, you don't have to worry about moving it around inside your scene. One position because it's all about rotation. All right, so My shadows are still too long, so I need to shorten them. My shadows are a little shorter. Now I need to rotate it a little more to the right, which is kind of like moving that. Now they need to be a little longer. Let's do that. So pretty close. You can see I got a little bit of wobble here in this shadow in the front block. But it's pretty close. Now, that's what you want to do. Light direction first. Now, you may want to go back and forth between light direction and intensity a couple times, because sometimes you need the light to be brighter so you can see it, so you can find your shadows. So my shadow position is not bad. It's not perfect, but I want to get the intensity a little bit brighter to match my reference. So let's go under the attribute editor, light. Yeah, still looks like it needs to be a little brighter. Looks like it still needs to be a little brighter. A little too bright. All right. Not too bad. Let me see if I can dial in that shadow length just a little bit. All right, so mine need to be just a touch longer. So I'm going to hold my breath and just move this ever so slightly. Okay, that's a little better. I got a little tiny bit of wobble. You get a little wobble like that. That is an acceptable margin of accuracy. Everybody see that? A little bit of wobble in the front here. That's really pretty close. That's good. Anything more than that, you're going to want to try and refine it a little bit more. All right, so I'm looking at it. Light direction's pretty good. Light intensity is pretty good. Shadow quality, I'm noticing on my shadows, they are razor sharp on the edges. So to fix that, I'm going to go in and use what Arnold recommends. I'm going to go to my attribute editor, go down under Arnold, and change my angle to 0.5. So now that should soften the edges of my light just a little bit, and it does help. So light direction, light intensity. How about color? Is there any difference in color? Now, so this, you can pretty much say, all right, this is white light. Next thing you want to do, once you're all happy, crank up your render settings a little bit, put on the denoiser, render it out. I'm going to use my noise just because I know what I get out of that. Hit the render button. Your render times for this should be probably a minute, maybe a little less, maybe a little more. Mine's going to be a little longer because I'm recording, I'm streaming, and I'm broadcasting to 3 monitors. Honestly, with a single light source, I might be able to get away with less samples in my diffuse. because everything is direct light here. But I'm not going to take a chance. Yes, I will. Let's try 6. Yes. Yeah, you don't generally want to go too much higher than 8. Yeah, I would keep it there. If you need more, I would then take your camera AA from 4 maybe to 5. Because remember, when you do that, it's going to give it more samples anyway. Yep, that's a good question. You can go to 10, but I don't think we honestly have anything that's big enough to need all that sampling. And your laptop's going to melt. All right, any other questions while I'm waiting for this? Because really all I want to do is get out a render for you. I want to drop it into the template, just kind of give you guys a run through on that. Yes?
I'm just having a problem with saving it as a Faria, a TBA, out of Photoshop.
So in Photoshop, when you go save as, in the bottom there, it says copy, save copy. You have to click that button. And then it will change it, put the word copy on there. Then in the pull down, it gives you all the stuff.
Thank you.
It's thank you, Adobe, for an extra step. Yes. One light. So you're going to choose one direction for the area light. You have to do the opposite one for the direct. I'm sorry, one for the area, opposite one for the directional. Then you're going to choose side or back for the point. Then you do the opposite for the spot. All single light in the scene. Does that make sense? Yeah. And then for your light, for the 5th part, find a reference that you can create using only a single light. Whatever light you decide to use is up to you. Feel free to use any of the 4 lights that we use. All right, so this took 2 minutes, 29 seconds. Let's stop that. Let's save it. Multi-layer. That's because we give you MB, so save it as an MB. If you have trouble saving it from, like, say you have an MA and you want to save it as an MA and it won't let you, just save it as an MB. Likewise, if you have an MB and it won't let you save it as an MA. But usually it will let you save it in the same format it originally came in. And believe it or not, that's because it's the student version of Maya. It doesn't let you go back and forth between the two, which that's something new. Autodesk did that again. Thank you, Autodesk. Just always try and show gratitude for them. Autodesk and Adobe, thank you for those extra steps. It really keeps us sharp. All right, so we got this. I'm going to save it. I'm going to quit out and open up my template. So each light has its own template. For your comp, pick whatever template makes sense for you to use. So here's my directional. and I'm using the front. So I'm going to turn that off. Going to bring it in the same way I did with project 1. Command O to open it. Go to my downloads. There's my EXR. Don't forget EXR options. Always open your alpha channel data as alpha channel. Select all. Command A to copy. Command C. Close it. Paste it. There you go. Wait, why didn't it go in? Well, it's because it's not in a layer. So let's pop it in this layer here. There we go. And let's move it around. Like I said, I like to zoom in so I can make sure it's snapped. Oh, got a gap over here on the right side. Let's snap that over. All right, don't forget, add your watermark, naming. For light information, you're going to use, I want to know what's the intensity that you used, what are the camera AA samples, what are the diffuse samples, and then your render time. Each light's going to have its own set of parameters. Like for the area light, there's going to be scale there. Did you have to make it bigger or smaller? What was the scale used? To find out what the scale is, just open up your channel box and look at what you scaled it to. If you need to make it big or you need to make it small. For the spotlight, it's going to ask you for cone angle, penumbra angle, and drop off. Fill out what you did. If you didn't use any drop off, put 0. Does that make sense? All right, so don't forget, save this out once you fill everything out. PSD, nope. You want to save copy, then save it as a targa. Don't forget targa options, 24-bit. There we go. Not going to save this. And there's my template. All right, so real quick, just to put it in writing for you guys, we've got the principles of light, right? You got light direction. You got light intensity. Light color, if there is any. Shadow quality. Hard, soft. Okay, for an area or for a spotlight. Number 5 is going to be cone angle. How big is your cone? Penumbra, that's your cone softness. And then drop off. Not drop box. Really? All right, so basic lights, everybody gets 1 through 4. You're using a spotlight, add 5, 6, and 7 to your list. This will work with any lighting scenario. All right, questions? No, I went over a lot. I mean, there's a lot of stuff to go over. Everybody good? How about questions in Zoom? Anybody got questions? All right, Katie's good. Jonathan's good. Michael, any questions? Amber? Michael's good. All right. So ran over a little. Well, yeah, half hour, sorry. You will get your full time. So let's go to lunch. Come back at 6:30. That'll give me a chance to render out lecture. The second part should be done by the time you guys get back. All right. Frank, I'll start the Zoom session up for you guys in Zoom a few minutes before. So I will see everybody on Friday if I don't see you before.